Hi everyone and welcome back. So in the last video we have done the Node.js intermediate problem number 1. This is the problem number 2. I cloned this code. There are two options. Either you can do on the web IDE or you can clone the code. So I did clone and I want to debug this problem and do this locally. So this is the problem statement. This is the Node.js intermediate statement. Node.js intermediate certification problem number 2. Okay, it's like some authorization middleware. Complete the middleware.js module, which contains nothing right now, and read the problem statement. The module default export, it takes middleware is something where you can intercept the request. It is passing X role header, and that will decide if user has access to that particular route or not. Okay, the scope of the route is passed to the middleware as a string. So if you see these routes, we are passing the scope as a task. Task is maybe the entity and this is the operation name, right? This is being passed. Okay, so the role scope mapping is stored in the file roles.txt. So for the admin role, the scope is this. On the task entity, he can do create get by ID. If the role is customer, then the scope is this. On the task entity, he can do get by ID. This is a kind of clear, but we need to write a parser logic. So we need to read the roles after capturing X role header from the middleware, and then we need to check if the user is allowed, if that particular role is allowed for this particular task or not. So if we see this task.create get by id app.js, okay, this is the middleware, right? So what we are getting, first of all, we are passing X role. X role can be a customer or can be admin, right? If X role is a customer, here you can see if X role is a admin, then he should be allowed to do task.create or task.get by id. If X role is a customer, then he will be allowed only to do task.get by id. Task.get by id. The customer cannot access this route. Only admin can access both task create and task get by id based on the rule which is written in the readme file. Okay, you can see this is the role. We need to check the role which we are getting in the X role. If role is admin, on the task scope he can do both. On the task entity he can do both the tasks, both the he can access both the methods, you can say. Okay. So this is just all about, okay, if the scope is not matching, you should send 403, right? All these things. If X role header is not present in the JSON, you should return 403. All these requirements. So we will write the middleware.js. Okay, so middleware.js is simple. What we are doing here is, first of all, we have to get the role. Const role we are getting from the request dot headers X role. First of all, if role is there, then do this. Otherwise, what we need to do, we need to send a status code response.status 403.json whatever empty. Here we need to do all the calculations. Now we already know that we have a roles.txt file, so we have to read it. No any other option. fs.read file, and we already have this roles file, role file, and there is a callback. What will be the encoding while reading the file? UTF-8, and either we can get the error while reading the file or we get the data. This is error first callback. If we got the error, that means we need to just send the status to 403 with the error, or just a JSON with empty object if we got the data, right? Let's say if we got the data, So we will just get the data. So first of all, we need to get the scope. So what is the scope? Where the scope is defined. So first we can get the mapper, and what we will do is we are reading the file, so we have to parse the file to get the data. So data dot to string. First let's convert the encoding UTF-8. I mean I encountered this issue, that's why I will be adding this logic. I have to replace these special characters. To string replace, because I was not able to parse it even if I was having the proper data. So this kind of encoding you have to remove. Once we got the mapper, you can so what we need to do now, we got the role, we got the file, we got the file data. So here we need to check if is allowed, right? So we need to write a simple logic, const is allowed. We can write a simple method check role, and there we can pass our mapper object, and what else we have. So we also need to pass the scope, right? So we are getting the scope will be like this. Scope will be task and create. Okay, so first of all split these values. So it can be local scope and the action that we will get using just a split using dot. So I'm talking about this task dot get by id. So in that case the local scope will be the task and the action is get by id. So we'll pass all these properties, local scope, action, and the role. And then this particular method is going to decide that we are allowed to access or not. If is allowed is true, then do the next. Otherwise, we'll just simply say is response dot status 403.json empty object. This is the whole logic. Now the whole logic we have to write in the check role method. We can create a separate function which will do this thing. Here we are passing the mapper object, local scope, and action, and the role. So if you see, mapper is object, local scope is like the task, action is get by id, role is, let's say, admin, right? And we already have this JSON hierarchy. So mapper object, how the mapper object looks like? Mapper object looks like this. Now you can think of how can we parse this thing, right? There is a role admin scope. We just need to check if the role is admin and the scope is task and the action is get by id, then allow this user. So we can just let I of mapper, and here if we need to check, we need to move forward if the role is same as I dot role, because in this mapper object there are both the roles, customer and the admin. If the role equal to I dot role, let's say we are just checking for the admin, then we will get the scopes equal to I, and then if scope of local scope, if this is there, then we will just do a comparison. If scope of the local scope, and then this is an array, right? If this includes your action, right? I'm talking about this array. Scope of the local scope is the task that includes, because this is an array, includes this particular action, which is get by id or create. If this is true, then return true, otherwise if nothing, then return false from this function. Yeah. And this is the whole logic, plain and simple, right? If role is I dot role, we are talking about one role one by one. We got the scope from this object. From this object, scope will be the tasks, right? So inside a task, are you allowed to access create or get by id based on your role is written here. Okay, now you can push it, and then we can just run the test cases on the Heroku, on the HackerRank. If everything passes, we are good. Thanks everyone. So here also we can see that the same problem, same code statement, check role, and here is the middleware. First we are reading the role property, and then if the role property is there, then we are reading the file. If the file is there is some problem while reading the file, send unauthorized or forbidden, and then you split the action you are getting, the scope and the action, and then from this file, from based on the data from this file, you have to check if user is authorized. You have to check role. If is allowed, then allow him, otherwise send a 403. So here you can see we can run the test, and if everything is passing, we can submit this. So this is a simple authorization middleware code, right? What we have to do is we have to read the scope name and the action name from the file, and we have to check if user is authorized, and all the test cases are passing, not one failing. But I think this is just a timeout. We can still submit this. And we can submit the Node.js.